Ladies and gents, welcome back to another Engineers podcast. Today I've got Kevin Goldsmith, who's got a pretty incredible technology background, and he's going to do the honors of talking about himself in the next couple of moments. He's currently at Distrokid, where we're going to be talking about Distrokid today, some technology challenges, more about the business. We're going to be talking about some technology challenges that the business made a number of years back and some pretty outdated tech, and actually how they've moved through the gears and how you can be really pragmatic and a number of things in there. But Kevin, talk to us a little bit about your background, introduce yourself and introduce DistroKid and who you are.
Absolutely delighted to be on the Engineers podcast. I've been working for a while, over 30 years now. So I'm not going to do the
Don't do
full
that.
history. S- Uh, some highlights: started IBM, Silicon Graphics back in the way back. Spent a lot of my career at Microsoft. So I was in Microsoft Research, Microsoft Windows team, Windows Media, more importantly. Then I was at Adobe for a number of years. I worked in commercial photography, digital imaging. There, worked on a bunch of versions of Creative Suite. Um I went from there to Spotify, also kind of
Yep.
relevant for what I do today. So I was at Spotify for a number of years in Sweden as Spotify grew. So I got to see, Spotify grow not only in users, but obviously the company grew and got to do that whole squads, tribes model, guilds thing
Yep.
from nearly the beginning. So I got to do that for a while. Since being at Spotify, I've been a CTO and a CTO primarily in kind of mid-stage growth startups, legal tech, fintech, edutech, and most recently, I'm back in music and working at Distrokid. Distrokid is a company that helps artists put their music into all the internet stores and all the internet streaming. We distribute somewhere between 40 and 60% of all the music that's on Spotify or Apple Music because they don't want to talk to the musicians directly. It's just a lot of stuff for them to deal with. They rely on us
Yep.
to work with musicians. And so we get your music into the stores, we collect the royalties and pay them to you. Is our main business.
Love it. Okay. Talk to us about what it's been like becoming a CTO. I know that's a feature on your LinkedIn. You did a talk about that, but it'd be good to hear from you on what it's like to become a CTO.
The there's a lot so yeah, there's a blog post I wrote about this and I think the interesting thing is if you talk to five different CTOs, even CTOs at companies my size, CTOs at companies bigger, CTOs at companies smaller, we all had very different paths, right? There is no one path.
Yep.
For me, because I've been in the industry, I probably took a pretty. I took a much longer path. I was in bigger companies for a long time before I started moving to smaller and smaller companies. And so for me, like I spent a lot of years as a manager, and then senior manager, and then director, and then VP before I became a CTO. Other people join a startup, end up as CTO 2 years later, right? So for me, it was very much I'm a developer. I want to be a really good developer. Being a developer is all I care about. And then somewhere in there, like I got made a manager, even though I wasn't ready. And then I said, no, this is horrible. I want to be a developer again. And then sort of over time realizing, you know what, actually the problems I'm interested in are actually more the people problems and the management problems and how do we do the work well, not just the technology problems. And then very deliberately deciding, you know what, I think I want to be a manager now, and then deciding, okay, I want to be a good manager and
Yep.
kind of growing in the role. So for me, it was very much a sort of deliberate choice. I want to move into management. I was at a big company. I took advantage of the resources the company had around training.
Yep.
I spent many years managing kind of a team of 8 team of 14, team of 20, team of 40, then team of 80, team of 150, team of 175 before I then kind of became a CTO. Somebody else might, like I said, somebody else might either help found a company and just grow with a company, or be an early developer and just have the natural kind of skill set and drive and just become a CTO just kind of naturally through that. We all have our own paths. Mine was maybe a little bit more circuitous than others might have had.
What does a CTO do? And that varies person to person as well,
Yeah.
CTO to
Oh,
CTO, right?
absolutely. Oh, absolutely. So that's another important thing. You can talk to 5 different CTOs and tell them to tell you what the job of the CTO is. And there'll be a lot of overlap, one would hope, but it is very different in different roles and in different size companies. So for me, I tend to be at a company that's usually like a Series C, Series D size company, a few hundred people working there. That's kind of my kind of skill set or where
Yeah,
I've developed to. So for me, a lot of my time is really spent on strategy, technical strategy, corporate strategy. I'm spending a lot of my time working with, if I'm in a B2B company, the sales team, working with marketing, working obviously with the product team, talking to customers, as well as kind of looking at our architecture, looking at how our teams are working, and kind of doing that actual leadership of the tech team. That's maybe about half of my job is really kind of focusing down in the org. The other half is kind of supporting the company because I'm a C-level person. In smaller companies, so Distrokid's a bit smaller than that. For at Distrokid, I'm a little bit more focused down, but partially it's because we're really a B2C company.
mhm,
So, we have millions of customers. I'm not doing sales calls with them. We don't have a sales team, but I am meeting with marketing, product,
yeah,
legal, all that stuff. But I spend a lot more of my time kind of looking at how we grow the platform. Are we doing the right things around that? I'm prototyping some ways I want us to kind of think about differently the way we approach stuff. So I'm actually building a few things.
yeah,
In a bigger company, I probably wouldn't have that kind of time. I haven't had that kind of time at Distrokid. I do. So, in a much smaller company, for a while as a CTO at an earlier stage company, yeah, I was the dev lead. I was also the DevOps team by myself because we needed it and I could do it. So it
yeah.
really varies on the size of the company.
Yeah. Size of company, I think you touched on something quite interesting, B2B versus B2C.
Oh yeah,
That might change the role slightly. Um, but I appreciate it can vary. It can vary, but I think it's quite a common topic at the moment. What does a CTO do? And I think you touched on a lot of things or everything that I would naturally think about. And more, by the way, you're the CTO, I'm not. You touched on a lot more than I would imagine. Um, okay. Give us an intro into DistroKid. A lot of people wouldn't have necessarily heard of DistroKid, but
yeah.
millions of customers, massively influential in the music space. Talk to us about DistroKid.
So yeah, it's a kind of company where if you're in music, you know it, and if you're, if unless you're a musician or somebody in the industry, yeah, you probably haven't necessarily heard of it, unless you saw like an artist wearing a DistroKid T-shirt or a
Yeah,
sticker on a guitar case or something like that. Um, so for us, we're an interesting company in that our founder, uh, he uh, he was he's a multiple Philip Kaplan. He's a multiple time entrepreneur. He's also very technical. So he built the platform. He had sold his last company. He's also a musician. He wanted to distribute some music he'd made. He tried some of our competitors, was really unsatisfied with the experience, and said, "Well, I could do this better for me." Started to build something, and it turned into DistroKid. And so we're interesting in that, like a lot of startups, we have a code base that's been around for a while.
Mhm.
Um, Unlike a lot of startups, we have a code base that is generally, a large part is written by a single developer. And then
Mhm.
only in the last few years have we started growing the team and growing the team quite much larger. And so we're evolving a lot of the platform. But a lot of it, it's a kind of thing of one of the things I really appreciate about the company is there's a real spirit of pragmatism.
Mm.
There's a thing in software, Yagni, you aren't going to need it. Don't build things that you don't need. It's a very lean idea. It's a very pragmatic idea. We very much live by that. So it is a very kind of, you build what you need, and when it doesn't work anymore, you replace it with something new. So there is a kind of idea of constant refactoring. But there's also idea of like, let's not build something we're going to need 5 years from now. Let's build something we need today, and so that makes things easier. It also makes things harder.
Yeah.
We tend to be able to produce stuff actually really quickly. We can come up with an idea for a new feature and deploy it, you know, in a weekend or in a few days, right?
Wow.
Which is really great. Like I haven't been at a company who could do that since Spotify.
Yeah.
And we'll try it. We'll try it in the market. We'll see if artists like it. We'll see if it gets traction. If it does, then we invest more into it and build it to be more robust and build it to scale a little bit better. But we'll only ever take it to the point we need it to, up to the point, and then we pay attention. And if it starts to not be working as well anymore, we fix it. So it's a kind of a very different mindset from a lot of scaling companies I've been at, where you're really trying to build, you're trying to build way ahead, and you're also paying down a lot of tech debt. We do that a lot, but we do it in a very pragmatic way, which is honestly it's very refreshing, to be in a company that really embraces that approach, because a lot of companies really aren't thinking that way.
Yeah. You touched on something that we spoke about offline, and we're going to touch on it today:
Yeah.
approach and being culture first, where a lot of companies say they aren't. But we'll touch on that a little bit further down the line.
Mm.
I think it'd be really interesting to touch on some of the interesting technology choices that you've inherited, and I guess the mindset towards using those technologies, and almost a current mindset to today's developer and how they're thinking about using some of the languages and platforms that
Yeah.
are so widely spoken about. So, two parts in there. What have you inherited, and what do you see the mindset of engineers being like today?
you know one of the early decisions that was made at the company was to embrace a language called Lucy. Lucy is an open source implementation of Cold Fusion, of Adobe Cold Fusion. And from a sort of page templating language, like which Cold Fusion is, it's not that different from Ruby or something
Yeah,
else. It runs on the JVM, but it's, let's call it, esoteric. Not a lot of people in the world using it, right?
yeah,
And that's uh, that's a blessing and a curse a little bit. The blessing is a lot of the developers, a lot of senior developers we have are experts in this language, because that's one of the reasons they came to work at Distrokid, is because they like this language. And we have the core contributors to the Lucy project as well at the company. So
okay,
so
wow,
we are experts in this language. The difficulty is not a lot of people know this language, and not a lot of people are that interested in this language, or are kind of choosing it. Right? It's not a growing language.
hmm,
So on one hand, a lot of our code is written in this language. It works fine. It is the platform itself is continuing to be improved over time. On the bad part is, it's harder to attract developers to this because they don't know it. One of the
yeah,
things that we've found, is been that this is what we were talking about before the podcast, is for developers, there what we hear sometimes is they'll say, "Well, I only want to work on,
yeah,
I'm worried that if I work on this language, that it's going to be bad on my resume, right?" And or I only want to work on Rust, or I only want to work on this, and they're not current Rust developers. Like I could understand if you spent the last few years working in Rust, you want to keep working in Rust or
Mhm.
whatever, C or whatever. But that's, me personally as a developer, as many years as a developer, I wrote professionally in C, Lisp, Prolog, Java, Scheme, um, C Sharp. Obviously, I was at Microsoft a long time. C Sharp, Visual Basic, JavaScript, uh, probably easily 15 different languages, Python.
Yeah.
Uh, so I and like Go and stuff. So I learned, I came out of school being a C developer, right? C++ developer. Over the years, I learned a lot of other languages and was learned them well enough to be a professional developer in them. So when I look at some that kind of thing, it sort of doesn't make sense to me because I know, there's a set of languages that we all use today. In 5 years, 10 years, we'll probably be using different languages. It's unlikely that the languages that professional developers use today are going to be the languages that professional developers use 10 years from now. And the mistakes I've seen, my folks of my era have made who stayed as developers is they never bothered to learn the new stuff. They became experts in whatever they were experts in and never wanted to switch out of that language, and then kind of got sidelined as the rest
Yeah.
of the industry sort of moved on. So that's when we were talking about sort of the things I
Yeah.
look for in developers is you might be a JavaScript developer or a Ruby developer or a Python developer today. That's awesome. Those skills are valuable. If you look at something like this and you're like, I don't know that thing, I'm not interested. That tells me that you're not really open to learning and open to trying new things or building your skill sets in different areas.
Yeah.
So that to me is a little bit of I sort of understand on one level, but on the other level, I think it benefited me to learn and program in different languages. I would love to see sort of, and the people we hire generally are excited to, or at least like, okay, that's another language. I'll learn that language just like I
Yeah.
learned this other
You have
language. Right?
you have to. I think in today's market, it does move so quick. People are
Yeah.
building companies, services, platforms with all sorts of different languages and technologies. I think it's more down to solving the problems. How do you solve
Yeah.
the problem as opposed to what language? I've said this so many times on the podcast. I believe that I speak to so many people about this kind of thing. And sometimes it does split opinion on no, we need someone in this stack to
Oh
write this
yeah.
service, and this is why we need it. Whereas you can just have a very polyglot approach, and we can get someone running a system design. Let's see how they solve problems as opposed to how great are they at JavaScript fundamentals or
Yeah.
whatever it might be.
I mean, I very much understand. Like, there's areas where I would want to find a sort of deep level of language expertise, right?
Yeah,
Where one of the things I worked on, my team worked on at Adobe, like we were building a compiler, right? We had a
yeah,
domain specific language, and it was running on GPUs and stuff like that. I had to hire people who had deep experience in this stuff because we were doing very advanced things, and
yeah,
learning from scratch was just not going to be realistic. If
yeah,
I'm building a web service, if I'm
yeah,
building, the kind of stuff that is 90% of what the industry does, I'm building a web service, I'm building a a website, I'm building an app.
yeah,
For that kind of stuff, yeah, like, oh, do you know some JavaScript? Great. Do you know Ruby? Well, we don't use Ruby, we use Python, but you know what? You'll figure it out.
yeah,
I like that because um, not any, if you have folks who are experts in one language, you encounter problems that aren't easily solved in that language.
yeah,
And people who are dedicated, I only do this, they'll try and figure out how to solve this problem in this language when
yeah,
the answer is, if you're doing data science, you probably want to use Python. You
yeah,
probably don't want to use, C. It's just not a good use of your time to figure
yeah,
out how to make this work in C unless you have very specific issues you're trying to solve.
yeah,
And so that's why I like hiring people who have a little bit breadth of experience because they'll say, "Oh, you know what? Honestly, we should probably do it this way because it's just this is what this is for. Let's
Yeah.
use that rather than try and figure out how to take this hammer we have and use it to fix this radiology machine."
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Segueing slightly, you mentioned, and it is part of the role of a CTO,
Yeah,
is you come in, you look at team strategy, you look at culture, which we'll talk about. But you spoke to me about how you changed how developers work and you changed
yeah,
how teams work. Can we explore that a bit more?
yeah. So I think one of the things that we talked about CTOs and becoming a CTO and growing CTOs because of the nature of the companies I tend to work in. I tend to be taking over oftentimes for maybe the founding CTO who got the company to a certain point and then is maybe having a tougher
Yeah,
time because they aren't an experienced manager, kind of
yeah,
getting the company to the next stage. And usually that comes down to a cultural problem and the way the work is organized problem.
yeah,
And uh, there's any company has got the set of things that has made that company successful.
yeah,
There's something about the way that company works that's different from other companies, and it's made the company successful. You have to understand that part of the culture. What is the good parts of the culture? The parts that have made that get everybody working together. Are we a company that collaborates? Are we a company that values kind of this or values that? Understanding that is important and
yeah,
accentuating that. But usually companies are also have usually if you're hiring somebody like me, you've also kind of hit a point where stuff isn't working quite as well as it used to.
yeah,
And there's lots of reasons why that can happen. Sometimes you have maybe had bad elements kind of through your hiring kind of entered into your culture,
yeah,
or you have more people than you're used to and you haven't figured out how to make them how they should work, right? And so they're kind of working at cross purposes, or you've got too much process or you have no process or those kinds of things. So a lot of what I do is really kind of understanding what is that's awesome about the company, what's gotten the company to this point, what's holding the company, or sort of specifically like engineering and technology, what's holding the company back, and then trying to kind of bring that technology team forward in a way that's aligned to the true sort of positive culture of the company. At a company like Distrokid, where we've had a little bit of a Cambrian explosion in developers, just the team grew quite
yeah,
large over the last couple of years, where it was a very small team, and a very small team communication's high. Everybody can talk to everybody, so you don't need a lot of coordination. People are finding the right thing to do and generally doing
yeah,
it, maybe with a little bit of communication to each other. The minute you now are big enough to have teams, you have to figure out, okay, well, how do we make sure that the team is working on the right thing, that the people within the team have good communication,
yeah,
that teams aren't bumping into teams, other teams are getting dependent on them, and we build like slowness into the system because there's all this coordination that have to work. So that's been a lot of what I've been doing at DistroKid. I think with the advent, really over the last few years, even pre-COVID, where we were having more and more remote teams.
yeah,
Another kind of thing I've seen, and this is one of the things I changed at DistroKid, is you'll have developers all over the world, and even if you have a really really good async culture, people still need to like communicate in real time to time. And one of the things I see a lot is like, oh well, this team has got like one person on the US West Coast, one person on the US East Coast, somebody in Germany, somebody in Israel, and somebody in Australia, and there's literally no time of the day when all of them would normally be online at the same time,
yeah,
right? So the overlap times are, maybe they schedule an hour when they can all talk, but a lot of people end up waiting on each other, and then teams are waiting on other teams. And so some of what I've been doing specifically at DistroKid, we kind of had this problem where teams were spread across globally because we do have folks across the globe. Was like, okay, maybe we try and put your team geographically, time zonally co-located so that you can have, if you need to talk, you can talk, many hours a day. That alone changed, was a big step. But it was also like, how do we organize the work? How do teams pick up work? We spent a lot of time on that.
That's interesting that I've spoken to so many businesses over the last few years, and that hasn't been something that's come up. Maybe it was just such an obvious point
Yeah,
uh, that I didn't actually pick up on it because of change of team structure, but that was the smart play when you're obviously describing that, and I hadn't
yeah.
seen that before, which I think
Y-
is really interesting.
I think it. I agree. Like I would assume people do it because it is obvious. However, it's not just Distrokid. Is the prior company I was in, and it's other companies I talk to where if you're hiring like a developer, and you're a fully distributed team, you don't really think about, oh, okay, well, the team is mostly here, but oh, there's this really great person over here. Yeah, let's hire them and we'll figure out kind of how to make it work. Companies like, Automatic that have this like fully distributed from the get-go and do a tremendous amount async and are really, really good at that. They they still meet in person. I've met in person, over video in person with Automatic people. So I know that they do at least kind of think about it, but they don't really talk about it. So I don't know how much they do that, but it is something that it just changes the game when you're not, if you want to do a stand up and you don't want to do your stand ups async, and there is a value to doing them in person, that conversation's valuable. If you're like, some people are getting up early and some people are, having to delay dinner so that they can do that, it just takes something out of your day. It just makes your day a little bit worse. And like, why should your job make your day worse?
Yeah,
Right.
that's true. That's spot on. So we've spoken a little bit about dev team and team
Yeah.
structure, or dev work and dev team structure. Talk to us about, like many others, people growth and
Mm,
some of the challenges that you've seen as a CTO. Probably one of your most important jobs,
absolutely.
people,
Every company,
if not the most.
yeah. Well, every person joins a company for a reason, right? Obviously, pay. Yeah, like I need to pay my rent, I need to put food on my table. But why choose one company over another, right? It is, what am I going to learn, or is the company doing something I'm particularly excited about? And I think smart people look at an opportunity to say, what am I going to learn at this place? How am I going to be better for having been there? A question I will sometimes ask candidates is, what is the job that this job is going to set you up for? Like, what's your next job going to be? What are you expecting your next job to be? And really, that's a question of, what are
Mm,
you hoping to learn here that is, going to be lead to the job that you are trying to get to someday. Nobody joins a company to someday be a middle manager, right? You're on, if you're a manager, you're trying to hopefully be a CTO someday, or if you're a developer, you want to be maybe a architect, or you want to be a fellow, or you want to have more responsibility. And so that tells me, for the candidate, are you coming, what are you hoping to learn from us?
mm,
But also, are you hoping to learn something from us? Because I think that is part of our responsibility as employer, is to help you grow, not only because that makes you happier, you stay at the company longer if you feel, there's the whole Daniel Pink Drive book kind of around motivations, but it'll keep you at the company longer, it'll make you happier to be at the company, but also, it's our responsibility to the industry to make the industry a better place,
yeah,
for all of us to work in. And so there's lots of ways to do that, and again, it's going to depend on where you are in your career when you join the company, like
yeah,
where have you come from, where are you trying to get to. But we try and do that, and I make sure that every people manager that is part of my team is thinking about, how are we developing folks, what are the new skills they're learning, do they see that they're growing, are we giving them, um, measurements along the way. It's not just a title change. Do you actually feel like you know more this year
Mm,
than you did last year, that you're becoming more confident, that you're ready to take
okay.
on new responsibilities?
Okay.
Yeah.
What's been the best answer that you've seen to that question that you ask, by the way? And I've absorbed everything that you've just said, and that's a really unique perspective, by the way.
Yeah.
Again, I haven't seen, but a really unique perspective.
I'll tell you the reason why I asked that question. There was a period, when I was younger, right, and I was a developer. There was a time where I was just taking a job because it sounded cool. Like, sounds like fun. That sounds like fun. Like,
Yeah.
that'll be fun.
Yeah.
Um, and I think one of the reasons why I've had a bit of a circuitous path is because I wasn't really thinking about that. I'm like, this sounds fun, like a fun gig, a fun team, a fun product. I'm going to work on this because it's fun, and not what am I going to learn from it, or how is this going to help me grow, or anything like that.
Mm,
And the difference from kind of me, kind of uh, working cool places, doing cool stuff,
mm,
stuff I'm proud of. But the difference between me doing that and me kind of growing in my role and growing quickly was me deciding, oh, you know what, this is where I want to get to someday, and then being very careful. I'm going to take this job because I can see that it's going to help. It's going to teach me these things, which I know I need to someday be a CTO. And that's one of the reasons why I asked that question, is just to see if that's, if somebody's thinking deliberately about their career, if they're actually if they have a plan for themselves. Um, and I've gotten, I've gotten some good answers to that. And it's usually either very specific about technology you're working on,
mhm.
you're using machine learning for in production for this kind of stuff, and I really want to learn this, or you're doing computer vision where I want to deepen my skills there, or it's been, uh, I saw you give a talk at lead dev, or I saw you give a talk, or I read your blog post, and I think you're somebody I can learn from. That's a little bit of the buttering up answer, but obviously, at least that tells me they've at least researched a little bit. But
Yeah.
um I haven't, there's nobody that's given me the perfect answer to that question. But I'd love to hear somebody someday say to me, someday I'm going to be a CTO, and I think I can learn that from you, or
Yeah.
I think I can learn that here, right?
I think it's that people first that people probably feel as if it's a loaded question.
Yeah.
And you think, how do I answer this? I need to give a political answer, if you like, as in, I
Yeah.
mean, political by say the right thing or say what you think is right in that moment, as opposed to how do I actually feel and should I say this?
Yeah.
I think I think I'd like to think 50% of people could have that answer themselves. Others might not have thought about it. It's just
Yeah.
about shielding that. But it's a really, really unique and interesting perspective. Probably one that I'm going to steal from you. In
And
all honesty, Kevin.
I want to be clear too, which is, if you don't have a great answer for that, it's not a disqualifying thing. It's something that, I if you have a good answer for it, for me, it's just a bonus kind of. Oh, okay, you're being very thoughtful about how you approach your career.
Good. Well, one particular engineering challenge that I do want to ask
Yeah.
before we wrap up is I know it is pretty straightforward in regards to how you're building and delivering value. It's at
Yeah.
consumer scale, but you're exceptionally data driven, and
Mm,
that's really important for the business. Can you understand, or sorry, can you help us understand what actually falls under that data driven umbrella and why?
sure. I think I think in to there's not been a time, certainly for the last 10 years or something,
Yeah,
where a company would come out and say, oh, we are not data driven. Every company thinks they're data driven,
yeah,
right? Realistically, having worked at a bunch of companies who claim to be data driven, most aren't, including companies that were data science companies, right?
yeah,
um, And the only reason I know this is because I have been at extremely successful data-driven companies. Spotify is extremely successful data-driven company. When I was at Ava, it was a legal tech firm, but it had a strong analytics team that we were very, very data-driven. We knew exactly at any time anything, everything that was going on in the business, and we could make near
Wow.
real-time decisions based on like our customer behavior, based on what was going on in the industry. So for that, the way that tends to work is a few different things. One, you actually have to have an actual data team, like an analyst or a set of analysts in the
Yeah.
company that can, one, know which data you need to capture, and
Yeah.
two, help interpret it, because we are all bad at that. Generally, like even those of us who've spent time in that world aren't necessarily good at it. You have bias. Oh, well, this is probably because of this, or this is probably because of that, or whatever. You make excuses. So one, it's actually having the capability within the company, and then two, it's actually knowing which data to capture and which data to use to measure. So telemetry within your app, business metrics. How are you capturing? Are you capturing the right ones? And then setting up dashboards or setting up reports where everyone kind of makes it their business, that they can go and look and see what's going on, and then if something looks amiss, follow up or
Yeah.
dig into it. And so in a B2B company, which I've been, in several of, that data is much slower moving generally, because your customer, and the interaction with customers is a little bit different. It's still critical. It's still critical to the company and the company's success, but it works a little bit different in a B2C company. In a B2C web or app
Yeah.
company,
Yeah.
it's real time, right? I can tell you exactly right now sort of what's happening today versus yesterday, on like which are we are musicians uploading more songs or uploading less songs. Are they using this feature? Are they using that feature more? How's that against last week? How's that against last year at this time? And if something's either going unexpectedly well, like, wow, okay, like there's a bunch more artists mastering their music today. Why is that? My first question is like, hey, marketing, are you doing something like this is cool, but what's going on here? Or if a number is lower, you're like, what happened?
Yeah.
Sometimes you, even if you have really good alerting and really good monitoring on your systems, sometimes the way you see something's not working is, oh, like usage has dropped through the floor on this. Like, what just happened? And oh, we missed an alert, and this system is down, and that's how you find out about it. But I know that because every day I'm looking at that dashboard to tell
Yeah.
me like what's going on in the app, and having that capability is game changing.
Yeah, it really is. I can imagine Spotify
Oh yeah.
were really, really on that.
Yes.
Seemingly you are as well. And I think you're right, as in, from a B2C angle, it's probably that little bit easier to really understand what your customers are doing, how they're
Yeah.
doing it, because it not necessarily, it probably feels a little bit more centralized, but you can get that real time understanding in one place from what your customers are doing.
It also lets you, the reason why Spotify cared, the reason why we care, is because it lets you try stuff. Like,
Yeah.
let's give, we think people might like this. Why don't we try it with a small percentage of our users, see if they like it?
Yeah.
And then if they do like it, okay, let's invest more to actually make this work for all of our customers. That lets you try things inexpensively, take risks that you wouldn't necessarily take,
Yeah.
because if it's not good, you'll know very quickly.
Yeah. No, this is really interesting. This is also a free space for you, lastly, to say, "Hey, you're hiring some great people." I know we've spoken about this in the past. So, do you want to share with the podcast and our subscribership before we wrap up? Just what you're looking for and what locations, and for everyone listening, things will be below for you in the description, so you can check out Kevin, reach out to Kevin,
Yeah.
look at some of his content, and obviously apply.
So we're hiring always. We're not hiring tons and tons of people. We're pretty careful about who we hire. Not in that, just we just don't let's go hire 50 people this year. Like uh, we're trying to grow in a very smart and sort of thoughtful way. So, but we do have
Yep.
open roles. Generally, we hire both senior and kind of newer to career folks. We are not geographically like we'll hire people wherever. We are primarily U.S. and Europe, but we do have folks in Australia, in Israel as well, in the UK, in Canada.
Yep.
So we do hire globally. When we do hire, though, we generally will kind of put you in a range. We're looking for somebody in a range of time zones because we'll be looking for you to join an existing team, or we're trying to add a skill that's maybe underrepresented in that time zone. So just look and see what we have open. Um, and we do use Lucy, but we use other things as well. And you don't need to know Lucy, but you need to be open to learning it. We'll be using it for a while. Beyond that, yeah, no, I've been blogging about a lot of this stuff for years and years and years now, over 10 years. I'm not the most prolific writer, but there's some stuff there that you might find helpful. And I'm speaking this fall. I'm speaking in London in October. I'm speaking in Germany in November, uh, and I think in San Diego in November as well.
When are you speaking in London?
I'm speaking at the JAX Architecture Conference. It's beginning of October. It's on my website.
Okay, cool. I'll check that out and I'll see if we can meet for a coffee or a beer
Oh, that'd be great.
at some point. And for everyone listening, if you want to join a pretty awesome business, I must say, um, they're obviously looking for smart people, be agnostic in your approach. Lucy's obviously pretty key and central to the platform, what they've built so far. A seasoned CTO in Kevin, who he shared quite a lot today. So make sure you do your research and come into some of those conversations and interviews prepared.
Yeah,
If that's the
if
case, or anyone smart should do.
if you're
Um,
interviewing with me, you should. I've just given you one of the questions I'm probably going to ask you. Yeah, of course.
yeah, exactly. Um, all the links will be below for people to check that out. And Kevin, just want to say a massive thanks for sharing about journey of what a CTO is like, how that varies between businesses, who Distrokid are, um, and some of the people growth I think is really important, and how you re-strategize and structured that. I think it will be really good food for thought for people. But also the pragmatism around technology. I think that's so key in today's day and age. I really, really do.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
And a big thank you for joining us. And for everyone else, likes, shares, subscribes, they will really, really help us. Thank you.
Thanks, Elliot.
Absolute pleasure. Hey guys, thanks for watching this episode. Massively appreciate you listening and checking in with us. If you want to find out more about us and what we're doing, please check us out on social media. What we're trying to do at Engineers is build a community to drive knowledge sharing and experiences. On Twitter, we can be found Engineers.io. It's no underscore. We've also got a website which is engineers.io. These links will all be posted in the description. Any feedback and comments are massively appreciated. We're always looking to improve on where we can. Thanks, guys.